We're ready.
Hello, everybody. That is Denise Rokicki with me, and I'm Holly Elissa Bruno. And we're both delighted to be with you on this every Monday conversation. And by the way, I'm in another place than I usually record from, so I apologize for the darkness here, but we'll bring light. Anyway, look, every Monday afternoon, we as two trauma survivors share with you and invite you to share with us what it's like being a trauma survivor and wanting and choosing and taking steps to have a good life. And this all emerged from a book that I wrote that was published in 2020 called Happiness is Running Through the Streets to Find You. And here's the kicker. How do we translating trauma's harsh legacy into healing? And so that's what Denise and I do every week. We look at things that are going on in our world, which reflects the world, and we say, okay, is this triggering us? And triggering means it's pushing me back to a time when I was shamed or hurt or annihilated in some way, and where my brain got terrified and got stuck. So when I am re-triggered, which happens a lot to trauma survivors, a trigger can be something as simple as somebody giving me a nasty look, or it can be a sound of a door slamming, or it can be just a feeling. Often it's running into people that remind us of people that were difficult for us, or that were our abusers. So that's what triggers. That's what a trigger is. And so what Denise and I talk about a lot is how can we, when we feel a trigger pushing us into a reaction, how can I choose not to be a reactor, but an actor? And Denise has devoted her life to working with young children. She has helped them in many ways find safety inside of themselves. I have devoted my life to working with adults and doing the same thing, co-creating sanctuaries within ourselves. And we both live in America. And this is a time when America is facing a overtaking of the democracy. And a lot of people are re-triggered. So I'm going to ask Denise if she's willing to just introduce herself, tell us about safety. So, because sometimes we talk about things that might feel unsafe. And then Denise is going to start us off with a poem, and we invite you to consider how does the poem affect you? And we'll talk about how it affects us. So thank you for being here. Thanks, Denise. How you doing, girl?
I'm doing well. I'm Denise Rokicki. I am an incest survivor. My stepfather was actually my last abuser. I had several molesters before that as well. And so I'm a trauma survivor. And I have a poem. Safety, safety. If you feel unsafe, you can go onto Google and ask for a trauma survivor warm line. And there, people who are also survivors will support you and listen to you and help you to feel safe again. And also, one thing that we always recommend at this group is that you drink water. Whenever we talk about hard things here, we take a drink of water. And hydration is the best thing we got. So here's a
Thanks,
little
Denise.
poem. I do not know who the author is, but
It
I
might be
will be.
anonymous. It
It,
might be anonymous. Does it say anything afterwards?
it doesn't, but I
Okay.
have it as big as possible. So I
Okay.
am not crazy. I was abused. I am not stupid. I was manipulated. I'm not shy. I'm protecting myself. I'm not bitter. I speak the truth. I'm not hanging on to the past. I've been damaged. I'm not delusional. I lived a nightmare. I am not weak. I was trusting. I'm not giving up. I'm healing.
Thank you. And Denise, as you read that, what touched your heart the most as a trauma
I
survivor?
was I'm not stupid because I really felt like I was not a smart person. for I finally figured out that I was kind of smart. In my first year, I went to a junior college right after high school, Davis Junior College, to study accounting and computer programming. And I found out that I was at least as smart as the rest of these people. So that really was one of my real healing effects when I realized that, yes, indeed, I am smart. And so that really hits me when it says I am not stupid.
So
And I
why,
was
what about the trauma? What caused you to feel you were stupid? Because that might be something that trauma survivors have in common. I had it too.
right. Well, I'll tell you what, the trauma of my father dying when I was 4 years old, before that, I was precocious. I,
Hmm.
I memorized a book, which my mom would have me recite for her friends. It was a manipulation because it's called The Owl and the Pussycat. And in part of the story is the owl looked up to the moon above or the stars above and sang to a small guitar. Oh, lovely pussy, oh, pussy, my love. What a lovely pussy you are, you are. What a lovely pussy you are. And they would laugh, and I never knew what the heck. So they were manipulating in that way.
Ah,
So that was kind of a yucky thing. But before my father died, I could recite that. After my father died, I became a non reader and I wasn't so precocious, which I'm not saying that I was precocious, but I did hang around with my mom and her coffee klatch friends, and I thought I was, smart and cool. So I think it was the trauma of my father's death that, took away my smarts.
and his death was a sudden thing. You just didn't expect that.
Yes, he was 27 years old.
Ah,
He, I think, truth is not something that runs through my family very
doesn't
well.
run through trauma surviving families much at all. You're right.
Right. So it has been told that he asphyxiated himself on vomit from overdosing from heroin. And
And
but
that
what
is
I
called
and I
aspiration.
right,
Mhm.
and I found him.
Oh, God bless you.
My mom sent me upstairs to wake him up, and he wouldn't wake up.
However, did you deal with that? It's a 4 year old. You're 4 years old.
Right.
He was
Yeah,
in, he was in your, wasn't he in your room too?
he was in my bed, yeah,
Oh,
because he came home, intoxicated or whatever. And
why? Yeah.
she took us into her room so he couldn't, you know, fit in the
Oh,
bed, I guess. I don't know. We were her protection.
wow. So there was trauma all around. Number one, he came home and he was high. That's not safe. Number two, she took you and your sister into her bedroom to help keep her safe and lock the door.
No, she didn't lock the door, but if we were in the bed, apparently he would go to one of our beds.
Okay. Okay. So he just crashed at the first bed that he could find, and then he aspirated,
Right.
and that's a horrible way to go. Oh my God. And your mother sent you upstairs to wake him up, which is scary in itself because if he was high from heroin,
Right. Which
did you,
after that, I was always afraid to go upstairs by myself also.
of course,
So like I
of
wet my
course.
pants we had a second story bathroom. So I would sit on the landing of the steps begging anyone, please go upstairs with me, please. And, people were not that loving.
Did they
So
know why you needed to have someone with you?
they knew I was afraid.
Uh, but no one put it together that you were afraid because of your being the 4 year old that discovered this
Mm-mm,
horrific. I am
no.
so sorry. So this is trauma up the wazoo.
Yeah.
And what do you, now that you know more about how your brain works, do you think that your brain got affected in any such way that stopped you from being able to memorize things and stopped you from learning to read better?
Yeah, I think it did. I think that I was, I was unable to decode the written language. Like I understood words, I, had a good vocabulary, but I could not decode off the page.
So you got locked into your brain because it wasn't safe to be
Thought,
exploring.
right, thinking.
And then, as you said before, and I'm not sure everybody's been with us, but you went to school and you didn't read,
Right.
but you survived because you knew how to, which was very smart. Tell us some of the things you did as a
I
trauma survivor.
copied, I copied and cheated and
Okay,
uh
but that's trauma surviving. You have to do what you have to do. But you
right,
also were very smart to become teacher's pet.
right. I would often be use my charisma of I like to help. So like I would clean the boards, clean the erasers, take the trash out, anything to be helpful so that I could feel worthy, I think, really, of a
Yeah,
passing
because
grade.
what you said a number of times is that being a trauma survivor, one of the deepest effects on you is that you just were raised not to feel worthy. There was nothing worthy about you.
Right.
You were not special. You were not, um, you had to earn your right to just be on the face of the earth.
Right. Even lovable or, my mom was not ever really loving. She had a alcoholic, drug addicted husband and three
Mm-hmm.
babies. And so
Was your dad ever loving before he died? Was he loving?
I
Was he
see a few photographs.
uh,
I don't really remember him being loving, but I see photographs of him like holding me up or, you know, things like that. So I don't know
but the fact that you don't have the visceral gut memory
of being
says a
loved.
lot. And
Right.
how do you think, or how do you feel, Denise, that puts you right in line with many other trauma survivors in terms of how their lives went?
Yeah, I'm not really demonstrative in
Mm.
my love. And, like I've had to really go deep inside to believe that I am loving, even, that I can be loving. I didn't have the example in my
Mhm.
home. So I did look for it always outside the home. I, had other mothers that I saw that were loving, and I had an aunt that was loving, but I had to develop the skills of being loving.
And here's another question that's true for trauma survivors too. And if you're listening and you're a trauma survivor, or you love or work with trauma survivors, one of the other traits that we have besides the ones Denise has described is that it is almost impossible for me as a trauma survivor to feel lovable. So hard.
Right. Like we don't even expect others to love us. And, I do believe that we get what we expect.
Yes.
Our thoughts flavor what we experience. So, yeah, you have to, I've had to develop that.
Yeah, I put in my book the very first pages. It's a saying that I learned because a counselor said it to another trauma survivor when I was there. And the counselor said, it's like an affirmation, Denise. The counselor said, I never deserved abuse. I always deserve love. The counselor said, I want you to say that to yourself over and over again. I never deserve abuse. I always deserve love. And that was like 1988 that I heard that. It's decades after that, Denise, and that has stayed with me because as a survivor, I choose to remind myself all the time, girl, you're worthy. You're worthy.
Yep.
Um,
You
and
have
and
to.
and lovable. And this is the deal, my friends. So when Denise was reading the poem, she picked up right on the second phrase there, which says, I'm not stupid, right? And what does it say after I'm not stupid?
I was manipulated.
Do you feel that trauma survivors, include you, were manipulated to? Yeah. Can you tell us
Yeah.
about that?
Well, I was, my sister and I were sent to Alabama because when my mother's husband died, she had like a nervous breakdown, is what they called it then.
That's right.
And so we went to stay with our grandparents in Alabama, far, far away. And she told us that there were three little girls in heaven that needed a father. So that further,
What a horrible thing.
right,
I
what a
mean, I'm
horrible
sure
thing to
she
tell
must
them.
have meant well, but coming across to you, that's like saying, those kids,
Aren't worthy.
they're worthy and I'm not worthy at all.
Right.
We had to go take care of somebody else. What are you talking about here? Because children do not understand why
No.
they're abandoned. And Denise, the two dynamics, the two feelings that repeat and repeat and repeat in trauma survivors' life, starting with early trauma, is one, a sense of loss. We lose what matters to us. You lost your dad. Um, I lost my mother to mental illness. And the second thing is abandonment. We feel like not only are we losing something, but people are leaving us.
Right.
We don't have anybody there for us. And so the greatest fear uh, is that we will be abandoned again.
Right.
And so when someone calls you stupid, or in my case, someone calls me crazy, I'm being abandoned by that person because they're just pushing me away. Now, here's the worst pain of it. Did you, Denise, start to tell yourself you were stupid?
I did. I believed it. I believed it, yes.
And I
Until I was
believe,
in college.
right, right.
And
So
once I
that's
was
like,
in college, I could see that just from the classroom experience with other people my same age, that, oh, I do know some things. Oh, it was a surprise to me that I
yeah.
wasn't the dumbest one in the class.
And what hit me, really, literally struck me about that poem was I'm not crazy. And what's the phrase after that, Denise?
I'm not crazy. I was abused.
And there it is. I believed a number of times in my early childhood that I was going crazy. And why? Because I was abused. And what was that abuse? It was in part that, well, I lost both of my parents, just as Denise lost both of hers. Your dad died, and your mom was unavailable. She just was unavailable. We've talked before about narcissists, and your mom was unavailable because she had nervous breakdown, but she also was very focused on her needs and manipulated you. Excuse me if I'm saying the wrong thing, but manipulated you to be the caregiver for your younger siblings. You could have been out playing, you could have been out discovering, but nobody was there for you. So you were abandoned and manipulated. And in my case, and if you want to respond to that, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you,
Yeah,
as you mentioned that the thing that triggered you the most out of this poem was that you're not crazy.
right. And there
And I'm
were,
wondering if
mhm,
is I think because your mom had mental health issues that you always worried that you were going to have the same. I have a friend whose mom is mental health issues and she's always worried that it's going to get her.
Yeah, and let's ask the people that are listening, is that something that you have? Because mental illness in families for years was not talked about,
Right.
was not talked about. Still, people don't talk about it. I wrote in my book what I discovered, which is that both of my grandmothers were put in mental institutions and both of them were given shock treatment. And my mother, having experienced that with her mother, refused to ask for help. She refused to get any help because she was terrified of being locked up as her mother was. Now, as a child, all I knew was that my mother was crazy. And I didn't know psychotic. I didn't know any of those terms. But you're right. When my mother would have, they called them back in the day in the 50s, 60s, nervous breakdowns. So when she would just lose it, and when she lost it, she became another person. She would scream, she would hurt us, she just lost herself. And I think that's because she was also an incest survivor, just like I'm an incest survivor. And when a child gets abused sexually, some of the scientists are saying, or some of the psychologists are saying, that is the worst harm that a parent can do to a child, to abuse the child sexually, because that is intimacy and it's harming, if not ruining. I'm going to say harm, not ruin. That child,
It's your innocence. Your innocence is robbed at
the
that
innocent
moment.
object, well said. And when we lose our innocence, who can we be if we're children? What's left except people pleasing?
Right.
That's what's left. So I want to answer your question to say that two things about fearing that I would go crazy. One, my mother was, and I thought, well, and her mother was always, when I was with her mother, I thought this woman is strange. She never related to me. She never took any interest in me or my sisters. She was always strange. And she traveled with another woman who I later on found out was a person that the family hired to stay with her so she wouldn't lose it. Mrs. Brennerman was her name, up from Georgia. And they hired Mrs. Brennerman to come back because they felt like she was the only one that could keep my grandmother sane. So here were these two women, my grandmother, who my mother took me to see a lot. And she would take me because I was the caring, sensitive kid. My two sisters had other strengths, but they weren't. I mean, in a way, suppose they were, but they didn't even like my mother. So I was exposed a lot to two women that were crazy. But here's the other thing, and here's another trait of trauma survivors. Have you ever had a panic attack?
I have not, well, when I first started a new job once I did,
Okay.
uh, but I knew that if I practiced, I would be able to accomplish it. So I don't think it was a true panic attack, but
So let's look at what a panic attack is. It's when it's particularly besets trauma survivors. And it's when the brain, just like being triggered, our brains shut down. So when a panic attack comes, it's because back to the threat. I fear like my life is being threatened, my safety, I'm totally unsafe, and my brain knows how to handle itself. It shuts down so that all I can do is survive.
the heart
Right,
palpitates,
right.
breathing becomes maybe not,
Tight,
yeah,
can't
you
breathe
can't,
very well,
yeah,
jaw locks, can't think straight. And I thought that's what I would have as a child if my father very was violent. And if I saw him coming at me, and I knew as a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, I couldn't escape him, I would have a horrible panic attack. And the panic attack was just my brain saying, you are in severe danger. But nobody said to me, I mean, you have a sister that you say would God help because she was very vocal about having trouble. Well, in my family, you didn't talk about any of this stuff. Everything was perfect and nothing hurt at all, as Kurt Vonnegut said. So I didn't have anybody to talk to. So when I would start to feel like I can't breathe, I can't swallow, I'm going crazy. That's when I felt like I was going crazy. And
Right.
because my brain, and here's what happens to the brain. And if you read The Body Keeps the Score, or you read any of the literature on trauma, what happens with our brains is that the executive function, that prefrontal cortex part of our brain that helps us be optimistic, that helps us make choices, that helps us have wisdom, that helps us have a sense of humor, that helps us be human, that is overtaken by a primitive gland. Denise, remember the name of that primitive gland?
P Pineal? No.
Oh, that's another one of them. But the one that they talk about even more often than the pineal gland is the amygdala. And you know the amygdala, right? So the amygdala gland's job is to keep me alive, including whether I'm a small kid or I'm 80 years old. And it signals to the system to send out adrenaline. And girl, what does adrenaline do to your body? If you get adrenaline, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the panic attack is the adrenaline is coursing through my body. The other thing that courses through our bodies is the sorrow hormone, and that is cortisol. Cortisol drives us to feel really sorrowful, bad about ourselves, unworthy. And so imagine that a little kid, 3 years old, scared to death that her father's going to kill her, which is what it feels like to a 3-year-old kid. I'm not safe. He's going to kill me. He's coming at me to hit me. And sometimes when my father would beat me, I would black out. And how did I know as a kid whether I was going to die or whether that
Right.
was just blacking out? So the part of the poem that spoke to me was right off the bat, I'm not crazy. And I felt I was crazy because of the two things I've talked about. Because my mother was, and I thought maybe I'm going to be like her, even though I was her caregiver and stopped her from going into episodes whenever I could. But the other thing was the way I felt inside of myself was so unsafe that I just felt like there's a crazy part of me. Does that make sense? Do you ever
Yeah.
feel something like that where you feel like, oh my God,
I didn't have that sensation.
okay, that's great. I mean, it's great, but it's not great because what you had is the total worthlessness.
Right. And to not feel.
Right. Tell us
So I
about
was
that.
numb
You had,
feeling. Right.
mhm. Do you
I
remember ever having feelings as a kid?
I mean, when I was on a bike, I felt good
Right. This is
getting
how
away,
Denise and I
getting out of
met
the house, getting away
like
from the house.
5 years ago. I asked the question to trauma survivors, what brings you joy? And Denise wrote, because we were doing typing in on a chat, which you can do too if you're with us. Um, Denise wrote, getting on my bicycle and feeling the wind go through my hair and ruffle it. Did you have long hair as a kid or was it
I
short?
did. Well, sometimes I had long, sometimes short, but yeah, that was my best sensation, my best childhood sensation.
And I had a bunches of those. I learned to swim as early as I could, and I would just nobody watched me. So I would just swim all day. I mean, maybe my mother would tell me, okay, get out, it's time for lunch. And I'd go make myself a PB&J sandwich. But swimming and being able to float on water, that felt like freedom to me. Lot like riding a bike.
Right. Yeah,
And
we had
so,
a pool in the back and
wow.
3 foot over the ground one, circular.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I would get in there in the morning and stay there all day, just going
Yes.
around and around and around, then turn the other way and go around and around. I loved being in the pool too.
There was a freedom there, which was, do you hear music in the background?
No,
Okay, good. I have hearing aids and my son is calling me, and that's okay because he knows I'll call him back if I don't pick up. But I'm glad you're not hearing it. So here's the deal. The things that helped us feel safe and in control, not like negative in control, like hurting somebody else,
Right.
controlling somebody else, but just feeling like, okay, I've got some control here. And when I would go to my Aunt Janet's, and she had a cottage on a lake, actually it was Lake Erie in upstate New York. And it was her cottage was owned by the Iroquois maybe, or the Algonquins, I'm not sure, but it was on indigenous folks' land. But the cottage was way up on a bluff, and my mother and her sisters would just be up there talking, and they would just say to the kids, go on down and swim. I think sometimes they pulled out chairs and just kind of watched us, but a lot of the time nobody was watching. And I felt so free. In a way, neglect can be
A beautiful thing.
paradoxically a beautiful thing.
Right. Because we did develop independence. And you know that's one of the paradoxes that I often grapple with is that it was good to be neglected.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I honestly, like you, I loved riding my bike. And back in the day, in the 40s and 50s, the bikes did not have gear shifts. Do you remember
No,
that? They were
no.
just like Schwinn, whatever. And I always got the hand-me-down bike because I was the youngest. And I had to like pedal up those
Yeah.
hills, pedal up, but I didn't care because I was free.
Yep.
I was free. And so there it is, my friends. And this is this is a bit of the theme that we talk about here, which is horrible stuff happened. And it was no child should ever endure. I am never saying any child should ever endure abuse, neglect, beatings, incest. No. What I am saying is here are Denise and I as adults, and we faced a lot of this stuff. Our ACEs score, adverse childhood experiences, right?
Face, right.
Those are high. And if you want to look up your ACEs score, just go to adverse childhood experiences, and there's a simple quiz test you can take, and you can get a score from 0 to 10. Well, guess who's up there in the higher category? It's right up there. Denise and I are, yeah. So what we do is to take a look and say, number one, this happened. It happened. And I have been disowned by members of my family. They will not talk to me because I have told the truth. There are a few members of my family who say thank you. And one of those died, my cousin, who said, "Oh my God, you're the first person that talked about this. And I went through so much of the same thing." But that's about it. Really,
That's
that's
worded in this poem too. I am not bitter. I am speaking the truth.
thank you for saying that. I am not bitter. I am speaking the truth. Why are we so forbidden to speak the truth?
Because our culture is all about the sacred man. Build them up. Let them feel powerful. Let I had this weekend with my brother.
Uh,
My mom really does that a lot of, you know, neglecting my self-esteem or my
yeah,
whatever, feeling good about myself to make sure he feels superior and strong and help, you know, that's our culture. Our culture wants us to only build men,
you're right, Denise. And the other part, and it's still happening in 2025. And
still
that's part of
happening.
that's part of the traumatization of the current administration
Right.
is that predators, men who have raped women, men who have abused women, men who have stalked women. They are
Men who
on the
hate
cabinet
women.
and hate women, want to revoke the 19th Amendment. And that's not a pretty or easy thing for those of us who are trauma survivors to see. I never forgot when Hillary Clinton was running for president and she was running against the current president. And he came out from behind his podium and he literally, because he's like
Covered.
6 feet, he hovered over her. Now she was being herself. She walked out to the end of the stage and she was like talking with people. And what happened is he was like stalking her. And I had close to a panic attack. Something triggered me. And what triggered me was that's what my father would do when he was
Right.
going
He
to
would take power over
take it away. And
with
there was no
body language, with cultural privilege, with,
threatening,
right.
with no consciousness. And it was no consciousness that he was doing something wrong. In fact, one of the things my father said to a woman at the nursing home where he was molesting them, he said to the woman who was like being very gentle and saying, this is not appropriate. We can't let you do this. We have our boundaries. After like 3 times of this, he said to her, I'm doing something wrong. Like he didn't know.
Right.
And she was
They
telling
don't.
him, they don't. He
I
didn't.
mean, somewhere in their heart, they know it's wrong because it has to be a secret. There's certain, they know it's wrong somehow, but they still believe they deserve it.
And that's why we have so many men who have narcissistic personality disorder. Women can too, but men have it because they're encouraged to be all about themselves. And if you're a man and you're listening and this is not you, we honor you. And
Yes, we treasure good men. There are good men, you know,
Fred Rogers was an awesome,
right.
most intelligent guy, and he wouldn't do any of this stuff. But there were so many who were given permission to do it. I'm an attorney, and the Supreme Court of the United States said that a man's home was his castle. He could do whatever he felt was he wanted to do in his castle. What happened behind closed doors was okay. Now, I just got an obituary from my hometown. It was an obituary of a man who lived across the street, who also was a teacher, who also was a principal. And I was angry at him. Why? Because he lived across the street and there was such abuse going on in my household. It was awful. And anybody who looked twice could have seen the
Right.
damage. But and even the damage that was unseeable, the internal wounds, could have seen that. And I confronted him later on. I said, look, there was a lot of abuse, neglect, even incest going on. And you were across the street and you never said anything.
Because they had blinders
And that was the deal. That
to
was the
other.
deal. They were not supposed to notice, just not supposed to notice. And you let people be. Whatever happened next door was their business, not
Right.
ours. So, and
Private business.
you got it. And so we often talk about the Dr. Claudius Black's 3 rules for trauma survivors. Don't you talk, don't you dare tell anybody, don't you trust anybody, and don't you have any feelings. So Denise talked about shutting down her feelings. And I only had feelings when I was outside of the house because the house was so unsafe. I would do whatever I had to do to get out of that house, and then I was free. And I was just talking with my one remaining sibling, my sister, and she said, we went way out in the woods. We went for miles. I said, yeah, we did. I said, I felt safe out there. And she said, do you remember the one time that they came walking with us? I said, you mean mother and father? She said, yeah, one time they decided they needed to see where we were going. And my sister said, I think our mother was really shocked at how far we went. But hey, that was where I was safe, and that's where I could have feelings. That's where, I loved animals. I loved water. I loved butterflies. I loved running. I loved the sun. I loved looking at clouds. I could have my heart out of doors, but the minute I came in the house, my mother would say, I would say these two words: funds up, funds up. So looking at trauma, Denise, if you want to comment at any point on what you're hearing through or what's evolving from what we're talking about here, is trauma survivors, that poem really does pretty well, because we feel stupid, we feel unloved, we feel crazy and
Manipulated.
and manipulated. So I wasn't crazy, I was abused. You weren't stupid, you were manipulated, taught to believe that you weren't, and your brain was attacked. Like my brain was attacked. My brain went to panic attacks, and your brain went to, I'm just shutting down here. I'm
Right.
out of here. I'm not going to feel a thing. What's the next line?
There's also, I'm not hanging on to the past, because that's something that a lot of families, like I could hear my family saying, that was then, this is now. Stop worrying about it. Don't worry about it. So, but I'm not hanging on to the past. I've been damaged.
Yes. You see, that's one of the reasons, besides the adoration of the male, which is adoration of non-feeling and intellect, IQ over EQ. What I feel is that read that to me again, Denise, so it can come back.
I am not hanging on to the past. I've been damaged.
Okay. So what I feel is, if I tell the truth, which I do, that I have been damaged, the punishment is exclusion.
Right.
Or the exclusion can come in many ways. If you're a person of color and people see your color, they done. I have a son who's neurodiverse. Done. If people see something where I look different, done. The thing about being a trauma survivor is our wounds are invisible. But that's because we don't have that much literature. We're getting more and more about the impact we have on each other neurologically.
Right.
We now know, thanks to the Institute for Heart Math in California, that if you and I are sitting within 5 feet of each other, you will pick up what I'm feeling. Your heart will know what I'm feeling. And I just read another study. I love these studies that said all of the neuroscience that's in the brain, all of the understanding we're devoting to the brain is pretty sexist too, because our hearts and our guts have similar systems, similar complex systems. And so for kids that are traumatized, we learn not to to trust what people are saying. I
Or
remember,
what we're feeling.
right, right. We learn not to trust ourselves, and we learn not to trust other people that are supposed to be our caregivers. So we become adults who are often promoted because we don't, we can just, what is the phrase? The cliche is like, we're self starters. Have you ever
Right.
heard that about you?
Yes. Work my fingers to, we'll work.
Boom.
We will
We work,
work.
we'll work hard. And what you said about when you were feeling like scared and awful because of your dad's dying, which was a horrible trauma for a 4-year-old child, and in your own bed, and your dad was not present because of his addictions. What you did was you started to shut off. You did what you needed to do to take care of yourself. You started to shut off the bad feelings and shut yourself down so that you could just get through the day. And
Survival.
that's the zombie thing. I went through so many days as a zombie because I couldn't let anybody know how I felt. And here's the worst thing. I want to come back to this. I want to hear what you think about it, Denise, or feel about it. We are so hard on ourselves. And I'm speaking for myself. I can just without even thinking about it, put myself down. You can't do that. It's not with me, it's nonverbal because the abuse started very young when I was pre-verbal.
Right.
So it's not like I hear a voice saying, you're stupid. I know people that of trauma survivors that hear, you're dumb, you can't do anything. What's wrong with you? I do hear what's wrong with you, because that I was told. And also, if you want something to cry about,
I'll give you
I'll give
something.
you something to cry about. I can hear those words, but the words were not the messengers. The fists were messengers. The neglect was a messenger. The pain of being unwanted, those were all nonverbal messengers. So I believe that traumatized children have exquisite, there's a study on this. Traumatized children have exquisite capacity to read nonverbal messages.
Right.
Of course we do. And nonverbal messages is this old-fashioned word because we don't have a modern word that tells us how gifted children are when our hearts read what's going on. Denise worked with like 3 and 4-year-olds for years. Did you see in those children who were so wise and so able to read situations with their hearts, even though they're 3 and 4 years old?
Yes, definitely.
Give us an example of how you, like, what did you see? Like what? Because I've seen little ones, 18 months old, 24 months old, comforting other little kids.
Right. That's what I would see is uh, children with emotional intelligence or that perceptiveness of someone's hurting. They
Yeah,
go, they immediately go and try to help. They even one of our prescriptive things we did with traumatized children was make them the helper. And we had a little bag of
right.
like
Like
band-aids,
a care kit, a
a
care.
care kit, right? There were
Yes,
band-aids and cough drops and all kind, ask for a hug, things like that. And those the kids that were most traumatized were the best at doing that job.
I believe it. Of course they were. And I think there's one study, and I think it drives me crazy because it's just so untrue in my experience. Um, and the study says children do not develop empathy until they're 5. I think it's
I
5 years
disagree.
old. Totally. I mean, it might have said 3, but I think it was 5 years old. Of course you
These
disagree.
these are the materialistic scientists that believe you have to see it to believe it. These scientists are wrong. They think that the brain is the bottom of the needs list, but the true
Right.
bottom is consciousness. And that's we are conscious as infants in our what do you call those bassinet or whatever.
Mhm,
We are
mhm.
conscious of the energies of the home, of the feelings of the parents.
And you know what, Denise? I believe you. And I also believe we don't have the language.
Right. Yeah, it's coming.
It's coming, but because we were raised to believe that logic and the intellect is the only respectable way of intelligence, we don't have common language for the ways in which we understand each other. So that's why when I was 20 something years old, I joined what was called and started consciousness raising groups because what were we doing? We were getting women together pursuant to Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique. We also read Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex. Women didn't have a language where we could say, I'm married to a narcissist.
Right.
And every day, well, when he gets angry at me and I start saying, you can't do this anymore, he love bombs me. Now, I didn't learn the term love bomb until the last couple of years, but that's a term I experienced my whole life, where
Right.
a narcissist would abuse me and I'd say I'm leaving. In fact, I wrote in my journal as an elementary school student, I remember it explicitly, I put in my book, my father bent back and he really hurt my finger. He almost felt like he was going to break it. It was just one of those Sicilian things, where you just hurt one part of the body and it gives the kid the message, I can kill you. It's
Right.
like Sicilians have a lot of those types of messages, sad to say. It hurt so badly. And I knew I could write about what he was doing to my finger, but I couldn't ever say, when you come in my bedroom at night, that was absolutely taboo. So I said to him, I wrote it to him. I either wrote it or I wrote down that I wrote it, but I said to him, I have to leave. I cannot live with you any longer because you hurt me really badly. You hurt my finger. And then came the love bombing. I think he got it that I was serious. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I knew how to get on the bus.
Right.
And I was going to take the bus south because then I could live outside and even if it was cold here, up north, I could live anyway. He wrote to me, and it might even be in my journal, in his penmanship, but it's there. He said, daughter, because he didn't usually call me by name, daughter, don't leave because I couldn't live without you. Now that's a classic narcissist guilting. I mean, that didn't come across to me as, you're so wonderful, I love you so much.
Yeah.
No, it was, I need you to scream at.
Service me. Right.
I need you to service me sexually. I need you to make me feel good about myself. Thank you, sweetie. That's an indicator we need to start wrapping. Yeah, so he would love bomb me. That was his way of love bombing. And then when I married a narcissist, he would do that too, except he was a clinical psychologist and he knew some other sophisticated ways of like getting inside of my mind, like something's going on here. You need to talk about it. What he was saying was, you tell me about it, then I own you. Now,
Right.
a good trauma therapist would listen with empathy. But to listen, that's manipulation. It's like what you said about being stupid. To listen, to get the goods on somebody, that's what a narcissist does. So, yeah, Denise, that poem, we might come back to it because it, for me, is like an anthem of what happens to traumatized children. And the thing about traumatized adults is that we have these children inside. And both Denise and I are learning. I remember the first time you said you want to get to know your inner children. So there's a theory, a system. It's called IFS, Internal Family
Yes.
Systems, by Richard Schwartz. And it's worth reading about or finding a counselor that does that, because what they do is help us talk to those parts of us that got frozen.
Right. And
Did
what
you
it
find
used to
that? Yeah,
be, what the understanding used to be, if you have parts inside of you, you're multi-personality disorder. You're mentally ill that way.
right.
But
Split
now that
personality.
right, but now that has changed, and what an IFS therapist would do with you is to help you integrate those parts that got frozen, or those parts that you had to develop to protect yourself.
That is exactly right. And twice, if not three times a week, I work with groups. I'm just a member. We are how could I say? We share leadership. So this week I might lead, next week you lead, and I don't lead for another 10 weeks. So leading is just facilitation. It's about helping everybody share, and it's about not judging anybody. And these types of groups are necessary so we can recreate a family system where we're seen and heard. But here's the book that I use in two of these groups. It's called Becoming Your Own Loving Parent. And we go through a paragraph at a time, or sometimes like a page at a time, and we look at things like, oh my God, who are these inner children? And in some theorists say, okay, we have in fact, I worked with one therapist. She was a colleague, and she said to me, when I go out, I take my whole horde of inner children. There's the baby, there's the 2-year-old, there's the 5-year-old, there's the 7-year-old. And I get that because children are wounded in different ways at different
Right.
ages. So and I think Denise was saying we need to wrap. So um, I, as the extrovert, will wrap and invite Denise to consider how she wants to wrap as the introvert. And I want to say this, that poem I'll put it on my Facebook page and maybe Denise could post it too. We think it's anonymous, but it is a truth-telling statement. And I put it on my Facebook page, and every time I do, people respond. And for me as a trauma survivor, it's saying, look, world, this is who I am. I'm not doing any of these things to injure or harm you. I'm doing these things because this is the way I was injured, and I don't want to stay defined by the harm that was done to me. I want to be free to make choices to give back to the world. And Denise and I are both about giving back to the world. And most trauma survivors are, unless what they did was the opposite, which is to imitate or emulate. This is hard to see my face. The abuser, and there are two ways that trauma survivors can go. One is what happened with Denise and me. We were the victims. We were innocent. We were victims, and so we are learning now how not to be pushed back into that victim mentality because I can't be myself if I'm a victim. But there's also another way trauma survivors survive, and that is by imitating the victim. So a lot of abusers, imitating the abuser. So a lot of abusers we have today were themselves abused. And when you read about our current president, especially reading his niece's writing, and she's a clinical psychologist too, she traces the dysfunction in that family. And so not being raised with love, being raised with insanity, being raised with abuse, narcissism, cruelty, sadism. Some of us, and I'm wondering if this is a sexual thing. I mean, if it's more male than female. Some of us feel powerful enough to imitate the abuser, and we become abusers. I thought that's not me, and I'm going to close with this. I thought that's not me, but guess what? I then started looking at my critical voice inside, and I gave it a name, and the name was Adolf. And I realized I have driven myself so fiercely and so hard for the majority of my life, just driven myself to accomplish things, to be outstanding, to earn things.
To be perfect.
To be perfect. That's another syndrome. People please, be perfect, all of that. That I didn't abuse others intentionally, but I abused myself. And that is something that I'm recovering from every day. Thanks for listening, guys. Denise, what's your
I'm healing. That's what I'm working on. Healing.
for healing?
Yep,
Okay.
healing and coping. And, that's why we put this effort into this podcast so that as we heal, we can share the healing.
That's right. And we invite you. And we know there are people out there listening. I think they're listening after the fact. 114 people were listening to one of our podcasts. So if you ever want to join us, just come on and you can be here, be part of the chat. You can be here visibly. We'll just take it a step at a time. Meanwhile, we're just talking to you because we care about you and we want to co-create with you a place that's safe every week for you to come hear the truth and reflect on what's true for you and know that we respect what you say because it's true for you. So hope to see you next week.
See you next week.
Okay.
Take care. Have a great week.
Be kind to yourself. And if you find yourself, if you're American or in another country that's going through upheaval, and you find yourself feeling afraid, crazy, you're not crazy.
Nope, you're
It's
dealing with
legitimate.
trauma.
You're dealing with trauma and re-traumatization. And that's a large part of why we do this thing. Thank God we're doing it, Denise, because I'm thinking we get to do something about this every week.
Right.
Okay, my friend, I'm going to stop recording.
Okay.
And good. Got any titles for this week?
Reflections on a poem.
That's it. I'll do something with that.
Okay.
Okay, girl, I'm going to get out of the bank here before they throw me out.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm on my way to West Virginia,
Right
Mount,
on.
and I'm going to do the one on music heals the traumatized soul.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
Enjoy. Travel safe.